Hey guys, tonight we're taking a soft stumble down the sticky, ale-slick floorboards of a medieval tavern. The candles are dripping, the chimneys barely breathing, and the smell, well, let's just say it's aggressively authentic. You're not a knight or a noble or even a bard. No, tonight you're a barmaid. Your shift starts before the sun even dares to rise and ends. Well, it never really ends. You probably won't survive this if we're being honest. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing how far this little sleepy history thing travels. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge out of a damp straw mattress, still warm from your own body heat, probably the only comfort you'll feel for the next 18 hours. The blanket's too short and smells like someone else's sweat, because it is someone else's sweat. You share it with another girl on the opposite shift. Maybe her name's Maud. Maybe it doesn't matter. It's not even light outside. The tavern sleeps like a drunk, fitfully noisily, with occasional loud groans from upstairs. Someone fell off a stool again. You don't check. You don't have time. You shove your feet into wooden patent shoes that are just elevated planks tied to your feet so the mud doesn't eat you alive. Spoiler, it still does. Your toes go instantly cold. The floor's damp, always damp. You wonder if it was ever dry in the first place, or if the entire tavern just hatched wet one day like a mushroom. The first job of the day is glamorous. You empty the innkeeper's chamber pot. It's warm. That's the worst part, and heavier than it should be. You try not to think about the fact that he eats mostly onions and pickled eggs. You dump it in the ditch out back alongside last night's stew. Something hisses in the shadows. Might be a rat. Might be something that used to be a rat. You don't ask questions before sunrise. The sky's still that pre-dawn gray-blue, the color of old bruises. There's a rooster nearby, but it's always wrong. Either too early or too late. Today it doesn't crow at all, like it gave up. You understand. You slip into the kitchen. Kitchen is a generous term. It's a fire pit, a wooden prep table slanted at a worrying angle, and some half-burnt ladles. You light the coals. There's no chimney, not really. Just a hole that kind of leads up and out. The smoke tries to leave, then gives up and hovers around your face like a needy ghost. Today's breakfast is the same as yesterday's watery gruel with a hint of barley and the bottom of a cask of ale that's gone vinegary in a way that no one will complain about as long as they're still thirsty. The monks down the road would scoff at it, but they have a vineyard. You have this. You pour a little into your own cup and sip. It's bad, but not dangerous. You once brewed a batch that knocked out the stable boy for 2 days. They called it Sleepy Donkey. People kept asking for it after. The first regulars stagger in just as you start ladling bowls. Old Tuck and limping Jeffrey. They never speak much, just sit in the corner and steam quietly, staring at the wall like it owes them money. You bring them their gruel, and one nods, maybe in thanks, maybe because his neck hurts. You'll take it. One of them passes gas loudly. No apology. Welcome to your morning soundtrack. Now the stools get wiped down again, generous. They're more splinters than seat, but you have a rag that's been soaking in vinegar water since last night, and you wield it like a sword. You scrub the tables too. One has something dried and brown on it. You assume it's ale, you hope it's ale. Here's your historical fact of the day. In many towns, taverns like yours were actually licensed to open before dawn, only to sell ale to laborers. This wasn't hospitality. It was survival. Workers needed the calories, and weak ale was safer than the local water. So yeah, you're not just waking up early for fun, you're part of the economy. But also, quirky fact time, some towns had official ale tasters, actual government employees who would test beer quality and quantity to prevent tavern owners from cheating customers. Historians still argue whether these tasters were helpful regulators, or just guys who liked drinking free beer at sunrise. You know which one you'd bet on. You make your way to the storeroom, which is mostly sacks of barley. One angry hen, no one knows how she got in, and 3 suspicious jars labeled pickled eel with a question mark. You don't touch them. They don't touch you. It's a peace treaty. The sun finally starts peeking in shafting light through gaps in the boards. Dust floats like lazy fairies, or maybe fleas. You blink, hard to tell. Outside, the street is starting to hum. Merchants creaking open their stalls. A blacksmith already cursing. Somewhere a child is crying because it's morning. You understand. But inside it's still slow. You steal a moment, just one. You sit near the fire and let the warmth wrap around your hands. You think about nothing. Nothing is nice. Nothing is quiet. Then the cook bursts in, and the cook never whispers. Where's the eel, he yells, because of course he's making that again. You sigh. Day's begun, and you'll do it all again tomorrow. You grab the chamber pot again, not the same one, the next one. This time it's from the room where the traveling scribe stayed last night. He tipped well, but he also drank a suspicious amount of mead and left behind a smell that defies explanation. You balance the ceramic pot against your hip like a baby made of regret and haul it out back to the waste trench. The ditch bubbles ominously in the morning light. You don't look directly at it. If it looks back, the day's already lost. Back inside, the tavern's coming alive. Smoke curls from the kitchen hearth. You can already smell onion pottage being reheated, which means you're in for a day of slow eye-watering and explaining to drunk guests that no, that smell isn't you, it's the stew. You pass through the main room, swatting away cobwebs that somehow regenerate overnight. Either the spiders are magical or the tavern itself is evolving. You wouldn't be surprised. There's something oddly ritualistic about mornings here. One of your earliest tasks is tapping the ale casks for the breakfast crowd. Not a joke. Men come in around dawn, drop a few pennies, and get their first pint of the day. That's just how it works. In fact, here's your actual historical tidbit. People in medieval Europe often consumed ale at breakfast. Water was so riddled with contaminants that small ale, a weak, low-alcohol brew, was considered a safer bet. Even kids drank it. Yes, toddlers, with flagons. The cask you're using today was rolled in from the cellar last night. It creaks when you knock on it, a sound that reminds you faintly of old knees or distant thunder. You open the spigot. Froth spits out in a lazy arc, splattering your apron. Again. The froth has this yeasty warmth that clings to your skin. It'll stay with you for the rest of the day. You could bathe in rosewater and rosemary, and someone would still say, "Smells like hops in here." You line up the cups, not mugs, not tankards, cups, mismatched, dented, and occasionally made of horn. One has a crack that's held together by twine. It leaks anyway, so you make a mental note to serve that one to the guy who never tips. By the time the first group arrives, a mason, a thatcher, and someone who might be a sheep thief, you've got everything ready. You smile, the kind of smile that says, "Yes, I've had 3 hours of sleep, and no, I don't care about your opinion on taxes." They slam down pennies. You serve. The thatcher winks. You resist the urge to drop his drink. As you pour, you remember something odd from the cellar, a small jug with a faded wax seal and an unfamiliar symbol scratched into the side. You'd asked the innkeeper about it once. He just muttered, "Best not," and limped away. You assume it's cursed, like everything else in your life. Once the breakfast pints are poured, it's time for bread. Yesterday's loaf sliced into soggy wedges, rewarmed over coals, until it's just about chewable. Some customers bring their own tiny meat pies or hunks of cheese. One guy insists on soaking his pie in ale first. You don't ask questions. You just hand him a spoon. You catch a glimpse of yourself in the warped tin mirror hanging near the back. Your face is smudged with ash, and your hair has developed a personality of its own. You pull it back into a knot held together by a wood skewer. Fashion. Your hands are already raw from scrubbing mugs and lifting casks. You note a new blister forming just below your thumb. You name it Henry. Welcome to the family, Henry. One guest asks for a clean cup. You hand him the least dirty one and say, "She's a beauty, like you're selling a used ox." He laughs. Good. You like the ones who laugh. They're less likely to throw things. The scribe from last night stumbles in squinting. His hair is sticking out in several directions, and his fingers are ink-stained. "Did I say anything strange last night?" he asks. You blink slowly and answer only to the broom. He groans and downs a pint like it owes him rent. You quietly bring him a chunk of bread. He nods in thanks, which in this tavern is as good as a marriage proposal. And then, of course, the dogs show up. There are 3 of them. Not yours. Not anyone's. They just exist, like gravity or mildew. They slink in through the side door and curl up near the hearth. You're not allowed to kick them out per some ancient tavern rule that you suspect was made up by the dogs themselves. You toss them a crust. They judge you silently. Let's break the mood with something fringe, shall we? There's a theory among certain historians that some taverns, especially in smaller towns, also doubled as impromptu dental clinics. Apparently, if your tooth hurt and the apothecary was busy or dead, the barmaid might be persuaded red paid to yank it out with tongs by the hearth. Is it true? Who knows? Historians still argue whether that was medical improvisation, or just another example of how little people respected their own mouths. Your stomach growls. You take a bite of yesterday's onion pasty, cold and crumbly. The crust shatters into flakes that wedge between your molars. You chew. It tastes like despair and pepper. You chew anyway. The town bell rings once mid-morning, only 2 bells away from the midday rush. You brace yourself. Another guest staggers in, a regular but not in the good way. His name is Oswin, and he always insists on his table even though it's just a barrel in the corner. You nod, point him toward the barrel, and bring him his usual. He tries to grab your hand. You twist away with a practiced pivot and the speed of someone who's done this 100 times. As you move behind the bar, you mutter to no one in particular. Just another day in paradise. A scullery boy snorts. "You mean Tartarus," he says. You raise an eyebrow. "Fancy. Did the priest teach you that word?" he grins. The cook. You both chuckle. Somewhere in the rafters, a pigeon coos. You suspect it's plotting something. You'll deal with that later. Back at the bar, you line up more mugs. Each one holds a little story, cracked rims, burn marks, initials carved with a dagger. This one was stolen and returned. That one was part of a wager. You know them better than people. You wipe your hands on your apron and lean back for half a second. Then the door creaks open again. Time for second breakfast. The hinges on the tavern door groan like an old man with a grudge, and in walks a woman with thick forearms and a face like she's chewed gravel for sport. Her name's Elfreda, and she's not here to drink. She's here to brew, because you're not just a barmaid today. You're an alewife, a term that sounds gentler than it deserves. Brewing is not quaint. It's not a cozy little hobby you do between serving slop and dodging handsy monks. It's boiling vats, yeasty buckets, and the very real threat of exploding fermentation barrels. Water's ready, Elfrida says, hauling in a wooden tub filled with what you hope is clean water from the village well. She sloshes it down near the fire, splashing your ankles. It's warm. That's almost pleasant. You sigh. Briefly. Then the smell hits you. Here comes the mash. Now, if you think of brewing as glamorous, maybe you've seen those trendy medieval festivals with smiling women in flower crowns stirring cauldrons. Allow us to clarify, your cauldron is a blackened copper pot, crusted with past regrets. And your stirring stick is actually just the same paddle you use for soup. It smells like onions. It always smells like onions. You dump in the crushed malted barley. It puffs up in a hot cloud that smells oddly like breakfast and wet dogs. The trick here is to stir constantly so it doesn't scald, while simultaneously watching for rats balancing the logs under the hearth and praying you don't burn the entire building down. You multitask with the wild-eyed efficiency of someone who's definitely dropped things into boiling wort before. Maybe a shoe, maybe a chicken. Best not to talk about it. Here's the fun historical bit. For a huge chunk of the Middle Ages, women dominated the brewing trade. Ale was a household staple, and brewing it fell naturally into the domestic sphere. Edelwives brewed sold and served, often running entire taverns themselves, sometimes even out of their homes. You were economy nutrition and social lubricant all in one stained apron. But of course, it wasn't all power and profit. The moment a woman made too much money or got too uppity, she'd be accused of watering her ale or hexing customers. That's right. There's historical evidence that the classic witch stereotype broomstick pointy hat cauldron may have evolved partly from women like you, brewers selling ale at market with tall hats to stand out and brooms to indicate they were open for business. Historians still argue whether that connection's more pop theory than peer-reviewed truth, but it's too good not to imagine. You standing in your tall hat paddle in one hand, glaring down a monk trying to shortchange you. Anyway, back to the bubbling vat. You keep stirring. The cook complains about the smell, but you ignore him. He smells worse. Elfrida starts measuring herbs into a pouch, bitters mostly. Yarrow, maybe some mugwort if it hasn't gone moldy again. Hops aren't common yet, not in your village. You'll get to those later in the century. You didn't forget the juniper, did you? She mutters. You didn't. You just don't tell her where you stashed it. You like having secrets. Once the mash has cooked, it's time to strain. That's where the fun really begins. You haul the steaming mass into a cloth sack slung over a barrel and let gravity do the work. The liquid, now called wort, drips out slowly. Rich, sticky, slightly golden. Smells better now. Sweeter. Still onion adjacent, but you'll take what you can get. Then comes the fermenting. You pour the wort into a wooden vat tucked in a back corner of the tavern, one that survived 3 fires, 2 floods, and a very enthusiastic goat. Yeast. Oh, right. You don't add yeast, not like they do today. Yeast is just in the air, or clinging to the vat itself, like ghosts of past brews. Some batches bubble up with no issue. Others stay flat and sour like a noble on tax day. That's part of the charm, or the danger. You slap a lid on the vat and make the sign of the cross. Can't hurt. Now, for the quirky fact of the section. Did you know that in some towns, the alewife's brew was tested not with tasting, but with a wooden bench? Customers would sit on a plank soaked in ale. If they stuck to it when standing up, thanks to poor brewing or unfermented sugars, the ale was declared too weak, too sticky, or just plain awful. This ale bench test was both humiliation and quality control. You once saw a man leave half his trousers behind. The tavern's midday shadows are stretching now, and you're coated in a thin glaze of wart sweat and flour dust. Elfrida's gone to argue with a baker, and you're left alone with your thoughts and a slight headache from steam inhalation. A customer passes by, sniffs the air, and says, "Smells like horse breath in here." You smile sweetly. "That's just my perfume." He blinks. "Oh." He walks away. That's power. As you clean up the brewing mess, scraping dried mash from the floorboards with a bent knife, you find a silver penny wedged near the hearth. You stare at it a long moment. It could buy you half a chicken, or a bit of quiet, or if you're feeling reckless, a new scarf. You pocket it without a word. Finders, keepers. Especially when your shift includes boiling cauldrons of potential death and being mistaken for a witch. Evening's not far off now. The brew will take a day or two to finish, so you'll serve the last of yesterday's batch tonight. You remember it being a bit strong enough to make a grown knight cry during a drinking contest. He blamed onions. You blamed pride. The floor creaks overhead. More guests arriving. More cups to clean. More chances to dodge accusations, flirtations, and maybe the occasional bar fight. But for now, you have a moment. You lean on the vat, feel the soft bubbling under your hand like a heartbeat. It's alive. You made something alive. Sure, it might explode. But hey, so might you. It starts with the mud. There's always mud. It's on the floor, your shoes, your apron, and your soul. The tavern might as well be built from it. You don't know where the guests find it. There hasn't been a real rain in a week. But somehow every morning the floor is smeared with a new harvest. Clumps of hay, blackened shoe prints, a curious trail that might be animal or man. You don't ask. You just grab the mop. Except, of course, the mop is a stick with old linen tied around one end. And it smells wrong. Like someone tried to clean something foul, gave up halfway, and buried the evidence in vinegar. That someone was probably you. The floorboards groan as you drag the mop across them, collecting last night's sins. A smear of dried blood here could have been from a fight or a butcher's boot. A smear of something less red, there possibly stew, possibly illness. Medieval Tavern Mystery number 6 for the week. As you work, you hum under your breath. Not a song, just a noise to fill the air. Because taverns in the morning are quiet in the creepy kind of way. Not peaceful, just waiting. You know what's coming, and it's probably spitting. You reach under one of the benches to drag out a forgotten cloak. When you find it, a wooden mug tipped over its contents, long evaporated. Inside is a surprise. A tooth, still a bit pink at the root. You hold it between two fingers, shake your head, and toss it into the hearth. A soft crackle. Goodbye, mystery molar. The sun barely angles through the warped shutters. Dust hangs in the air like old secrets. The tavern hasn't been aired out in 3 days. You crack a window, immediately regret it. The smell of pig waste and fishmongers floods in. You shut it again. Too much truth all at once. The scullery girl peeks out from behind the kitchen door. Someone smeared gravy on the wall again, she whispers. You sigh. It's the 3rd time this week. Always the same wall, always the same mystery. You don't clean it. You just hang a slightly crooked tapestry over it. Problem solved. You pass by the fire pit and notice the coals are spitting. Not with heat spitting. Literally. Someone poured something into them that shouldn't be there. The stew boy, probably. Again. It sizzles with a smell like burnt rosemary and regret. You shovel it out with the coal scoop and toss it into the slop bucket. A familiar ritual. And then the guests begin to wake. One stumbles down from the upstairs rooms, shirtless, barefoot, with straw in his beard and a belt wrapped around only one of his legs. He glances around, confused. "Where am I?" he asks. You don't look up. Somewhere expensive. He nods like that makes sense and sits on a bench staring at nothing. You hand him a mug of warm ale. He sips it like medicine. "Did I win the fight?" he asks. "You started 4, you reply. He winces. "Whoof." You give him a dry crust of bread and move on. There's mud again. Someone just tracked more in. You turn to yell at the culprit and see the culprit is a pig. Not a metaphor. An actual pig. Someone left the kitchen door open. The pig grunts, sniffs a chair leg, and starts licking spilled gruel off the floor. "Not again," you mutter. Here's your historical fact of the day. Taverns weren't the sterile tavern simulator kind of places you see in movies. They were lively, filthy, and often chaotic public spaces, more barn than bistro. Animals wandered in and out. Chickens roosted in corners. And yes, pigs. Some people brought their goats inside for companionship, or leverage in dice games. The pig settles under a table tail, twitching. You let it be. It's not hurting anyone yet. You move back to the hearth with a fresh broom to sweep up the ash and soot from last night. That's when you notice the streaks on the wall again. Not gravy, not this time charcoal. Someone's drawn a creature. No weight, definitely a caricature. Of you. Big teeth, wild hair, holding a ladle like a club. Flattering, you say to the wall. You leave it there. Might scare off the mice. Time for today's odd tidbit. Some medieval taverns were used as informal message boards. Travelers carved symbols into the walls, left messages in chalk, or pinned notes using fish bones or bent nails. It wasn't uncommon to see coded sketches, secret signs between thieves, or crude wanted posters. Historians still argue whether these were part of criminal networks, or just deeply bored patrons who had too much mead and no sense of decorum. You take a closer look at the wall. There's a new symbol near the chimney, a circle with a diagonal slash. Could be a tally. Could be a warning. You shrug and dust it with your apron. Let the next shift worry about it. Then there's the spit. Not from your mouth, from the guests. As the room fills again, mid-morning, drinkers, groggy locals, one enthusiastic lute player who no one asked for the chances of being casually spit upon go up exponentially. Not on purpose, mostly. But some of these people can't talk without sending flying flecks of ale and breadcrumbs in every direction. You become a master of the subtle sidestep, the casual duck, the innocent lean away. Did I ever tell you about the fish I caught splat? You dodge it like a knight. Best stew in all of Mercia splat. Sidestep wipe, keep smiling. You've developed reflexes that would make a fencer weep. And sometimes they do it on purpose. One of the regulars, a man known only as Bram, likes to emphasize his stories with dramatic mouthfuls of ale. If the crowd isn't laughing, he'll accidentally spray the barmaid. You once caught it full in the apron. You didn't blink. You just poured his next cup weaker. Revenge served flat and lukewarm. You'd be amazed how much dignity lives in the little things. You finish the floor finally. It's not clean. Nothing here is clean. But it's functional. You light a few tallow candles. Their glow is warm, their scent is not, like burning beef. But they do make the grime look soft around the edges. And just when you think you have a moment to breathe, the stable boy bursts in. There's a friar outside, he says, panting. He's shouting about sin, you sigh. The friars are back, again, The shouting starts with repent, a word that always pairs well with the smell of stale onions and hoof mud. You press your palms to your temples. The day's barely begun, and now you have a friar out front, frothing about tavern-born wickedness again. His voice is a high nasal thing, like a duck scolding a thunderstorm. You poke your head out the door. He's standing in the street, robes flapping barefoot in the muck, clutching a wooden crucifix like it personally offended him. A few passing merchants watch from a safe distance. One laughs, another throws him a dried apple core. He ducks it with flair. Sin flows from this place, he cries, pointing directly at you. Ale brewed from the devil's cauldron, girls with breasts like traps, bread baked in hell's own hearth. You blink. That last part was surprisingly poetic, you mutter. Then close the door again before he can recite more. Inside, the tavern crowd has taken notice. Bram shouts, "Tell him he forgot the sausage?" A burst of laughter follows. The traveling lute player strums something that might be a hymn, or a mocking imitation of one. You go back to collecting empty mugs. You're not getting involved. You did that once and ended up in a very weird prayer circle that ended in shouting and minor smoke damage. Still, the friar poses a problem. Not because you care about his preaching, but because he's scaring away the lunch rush. You pass the kitchen. The cook is elbow-deep in pie dough and muttering about cheating priests. The cook's wife, who is peeling root vegetables like they owe her money, glances up and says, "Give him something to chew on." That usually shuts them up. You consider the options. Bread crusts, no. Cold stew, tempting. Leftover eel jelly, perfect. You scoop a spoonful into a wooden bowl, slap a stale biscuit on top for flair, and march outside. The friar pauses mid-sentence when he sees you approach, bowl in hand. For your journey, you say sweetly, a gift of Christian hospitality. He eyes it, sniffs it, possibly regrets being born, but he accepts it all the same. You walk back in and shut the door to a round of cheers. That's your historical fact of the day, by the way. Preachers, especially itinerant friars, often made rounds through towns and villages delivering sermons in public squares or outside popular gathering spots. Taverns were favorite targets viewed as dens of temptation. While some friars were genuinely pious, others leaned toward theatrics, and a few were more interested in coin than conversions. Historians still argue whether these fire and brimstone performances had much real moral effect, or if they were just medieval street theater with better robes. Back inside, it's near noon. The sunlight has finally wormed its way through the dirty windows, catching flecks of flour in the air like tiny snowstorms. Your arms ache from carrying barrels, and your apron has achieved a new pattern of stains that might qualify as folk art. You refill mugs, wipe tables, dodge two children chasing each other with sticks, and step outside once more just to breathe. The friar's gone now, thankfully. You suspect the eel jelly helped. Or hurt. Maybe both. A small boy runs up to you with a coin in his fist. He holds it out, eyes wide. "Me mum says I can have beer now," he says. You blink. "How old are you, 6? "Congratulations," you reply, and pour him a thimble of watered-down ale. Just enough to keep his mother from marching in with a rolling pin. That, oddly enough, was completely normal. Small ale, low alcohol, roughly 1 to 2%, was safer to drink than water, and children in medieval towns drank it regularly. You didn't serve them the good stuff, obviously, but a mild brew kept them hydrated and not dead. Priorities. At a side table, a pair of farmers argue over how many hens you can cram in a cart. You don't listen closely. It's the same debate they've had for 3 days now, but you nod at appropriate intervals and make sure their cups stay full. You're rewarded with a tip, a half-chewed apple, and a smile missing 3 teeth. You accept it with grace. Across the room, a woman slips you a folded scrap of paper. You unfold it under the bar, a list of herbs, strong-smelling ones. Some of these you recognize from your side work helping the local midwife. Others, well, they're not for cooking. You give her a silent nod and tuck the list under the counter. Discretion is part of the job. That and knowing where to find mugwort at midnight. There's a pause in the rush. You take it. You sit just for a moment on the edge of the bar counter. Someone has left a piece of cheese behind. You poke it with a knife. It pokes back. You throw it into the fire. It squeals. Just kidding. Maybe. You rest your elbows on the counter and close your eyes. Not to nap. Just to be. To listen. The thrum of conversations, the occasional burp, the clink of wooden mugs, the rhythm of a tavern alive and breathing. Then the door slams open. It's not a thief. It's not the friar again. It's a noble. Or at least someone trying very hard to look like a noble. Tall boots, cleanish cloak, thin sword that's clearly for show. He struts in like he owns the dirt beneath your feet and pauses dramatically near the hearth. The room hushes slightly. He orders a drink loudly and slaps a silver penny on the counter. It spins. You catch it mid-roll and slide him a cup of your best batch from 3 days ago. Strong, slightly smoky, known to produce declarations of love and/or spontaneous singing. He raises the cup, sips, winces. Rustic, he says. Authentic, you reply. He smirks. You keep eye contact until he looks away first. Win. Mainstream historians often paint taverns as simple peasant dives, but the reality nobles occasionally slummed it. Traveling incognito, chasing some imagined rustic charm or just bored of court life. A night in a dirty tavern could be its own kind of thrill, unless they caught something, which they usually did. The noble sits at a corner table and starts sketching something into a notebook. A map, maybe, or poetry, or just doodles of his own face. You decide not to ask. Outside, the church bell tolls noon. Inside, the stew is boiling, the ale is flowing, and you are exactly halfway to your next moment of peace. You're hunched over the bar, sorting through the morning's coin like a dragon with chronic back pain. The noble's silver penny is still warm in your palm. Real silver. Probably clipped, probably cursed, but worth something. You bite it gently. No give. Real enough for now. The rest of the coin pile is less impressive, a scatter of pennies, a few half-groat something with a hole in it, and teeth marks around the edge, likely from a gambler who lost a bet. You start stacking them by size and weight, your fingers sticky with ale and grease, trying to remember which pile is real and which is good enough to fool a bishop. A farmer's wife leans over the bar and says that one's counterfeit, pointing to a dull, round coin with a bent edge. You slide it toward her. Then I guess it's yours now. She laughs. Fair enough. That's the trick no one tells you about being a barmaid. You're part server, part judge, part human lie detector. And when it comes to money, you're the one who has to tell a blacksmith his coin's been clipped, a merchant that his payment's only good in Flanders, or a drunk noble that he just tipped you with a washer. Again. You rub the sweat off your brow with the back of your hand and turn to the ledger. Yes, you keep a ledger. Of sorts. It's not a proper book, more like a wax tablet that's been re-scratched so many times, it smells like scorched honey. But you've got your marks. A dot for each mug poured, a squiggle for stew bowls, a fork-shaped doodle for meat pies, and next to each one a little line to show whether it was paid in coin barter or awkward smile. You pause at one of the squiggles. There's a question mark next to it. You squint. What even was that a stew, a bribe, a very small goat? You shrug and add another squiggle. Problem solved. Here's your historical fact of the day. Medieval taverns didn't just run on coin. Barter was alive and well. Patrons paid in firewood sacks of grain, salted fish, or promises to pay on market day, which rarely materialized. Barmaids had to track these trades mentally, or mark them with symbols. A few even used notched sticks tallies carved into wood to record debts. You tried that once, but someone used yours to start a fire. Today's quirky tidbit. In some towns, barmaids or innkeepers were legally responsible for checking weights of coins. If you accepted a clipped penny where someone shaved a bit of silver off the edge, you could get fined or even flogged. There were official weights in some cities, but in a muddy backwater like yours. You go by feel and finger wisdom, and maybe a little passive-aggressive guesswork. You hear a familiar clink behind you. A man's just dropped 3 shiny pennies onto the bar. You turn and groan. It's Merrick. Again. Merrick is a traveling merchant, part-time bard, full-time exaggerator. He always has a story, always has a plan, and always pays late. Today he smiles wide and declares, "I sold a cartload of pickled walnuts in the next town over. Your share." You raise an eyebrow. "My share of your pickled walnuts for the drink I borrowed last week." "You mean the 5 drinks?" He waves a hand. "We're both women of the world. I trust you'll keep the change." You gather the coins and mutter, "I'll keep the change, your dignity, and if you walk out on a tab again, your boots." He grins. "That's fair." Merrick wanders toward the fire, already retelling his walnut saga to anyone willing to listen. You suspect he's never actually sold a single nut in his life. Behind you, the scullery girl's voice pipes up. He's charming. He's a plague in human form. But with nice hair, you allow a smirk. So's a wolf. Then the merchant caravan arrives. You feel it before you see it. The slow swell of footsteps, the jingle of coin purses, the murmur of foreign tongues, and then 10 of them. Covered in dust, pulling off gloves, rubbing sore feet. Traders from far-off towns and far stranger roads. You barely have time to brace before they start ordering. Ale stew, something with bread, anything not made of fish. You become a whirlwind. Mugs, plates, laughter, elbows. One man tries to grab 2 pies with one hand. You slap his wrist with a wooden spoon. You get one, you say. "But I've got coin, I've got a ladle. Try me." He chooses the stew. You slide through the chaos like a boat through soup. The noble in the corner sneers at the new arrivals. One of them sneers back. A bard you vaguely recognize begins playing something lively. You toss him a halfpenny and shout, "Keep it upbeat or leave." The coin doesn't even hit the floor. Then the argument starts. 2 merchants, one with a hat made entirely of felt, the other with a scar that looks suspiciously like a chicken, are shouting about grain prices. It escalates quickly. Insults, finger-pointing a small bag of lentils used as a projectile. You slip in between them, wedge a mug into each hand, and say, "First to finish drinks, free." They stare, blink, then drink. The scarred one wins, by a landslide. He belches loud enough to make the shutters rattle. Peace is restored, and then the noble tries to leave without paying. You intercept him by the door. He starts talking fast. "Surely a man of my rank, you echo." "You mean smell? I have a tab at the Blue Goose in Winmere. This is the Brown Hen in not Winmere." He hesitates. Then, with the forced dignity of a man who's just been caught stealing lukewarm ale, he digs into his boot and pulls out a silver thimble. Collateral, you inspect it. Silver, yes. Fancy etching, probably stolen. You pocket it. "Fine," you say. "But if you're back tomorrow, bring coin, or your other boot." He bows, almost, then limps out. Historians still argue whether barmaids were viewed as servants, merchants, or something in between. The answer you know is all three plus therapist, bouncer, cook, and part-time pickpocket detector. You finish sorting the day's coin just as the bell tolls for evening. And guess what? You're on the late shift. Evening slides in like a tavern cat, quiet at first, then suddenly loud, unwelcome, and all over everything. The shadows stretch longer across the warped floorboards, swallowing up the wet footprints and dried stew flakes that somehow got missed during the midday chaos. Candles are lit not for ambiance, but because you don't want someone falling into the hearth again. That happened once. He survived mostly. His eyebrows did not. You move from table to table with a handful of tallow stubs, pushing them into the crusted metal holders nailed to the walls. Their flickering light makes the room look less like a crime scene and more like a very cozy nightmare. The smell: roast onions, damp wool ale, and something lightly singed. You check your apron. Not you this time. This is when it starts. The rush. It begins with a slam of the door and a gust of evening wind that smells like chimney soot and someone frying eels nearby. A group of laborers barges in sweaty, muddy loud and immediately calls for meat pies. You don't respond. You're already halfway to the kitchen. Tonight's pies are suspiciously hot, which means the cook must have actually used the oven. You grab a tray loaded up with 5, maybe 6 of the lopsided pastries, greasy, bubbling, and barely held together with a prayer and a pinch of pepper. You place them on the table with all the grace of a battle-weary soldier tossing helmets into a pile. One of the men looks up, mouth already open, and says, "You got any of that gravy from Tuesday?" You raise an eyebrow. "That gravy was an accident. I liked it." You shake your head. "It was mostly candle drippings." He shrugs. "Still better than my wife's." Laughter. You collect the empty mugs from their table and move on. The next group is a traveling band, 2 fiddlers, a dulcimer player, and a drummer who looks like he hasn't blinked in 3 days. They start setting up in the far corner. One of them tries to flirt with you while untangling his fiddle string. "Evening, love," he says. You serve songs as well as stew. You stare at him for a beat too long, then deadpan only dirges. "Want one?" he chuckles. "I like you. You'll get over it." He does eventually. The fiddlers tune their instruments while the dulcimer player hums something oddly cheerful for someone wearing boots made entirely of patch leather. Soon enough, the first few chords echo off the rafters. You brace yourself. The energy in the room changes immediately. It's not just noise, it's heat, motion, tables pushed closer, coins slapped harder, voices rising. Everyone thinks they're funnier when music plays. Everyone thinks they can sing. Most of them can't. You start pouring faster. Mugs slide across the bar like ducks on a pond, though occasionally one crashes. You've got a replacement ready before the foam hits the floor. Mainstream historical fact of the night. In many towns and villages, taverns were the only place where music, food, and communal storytelling collided. They were the social core, not just for fun, but for deals, gossip, marriage arrangements, and petty brawls over turnip theft. Musicians often earned their dinner and maybe a bed by playing a few sets, and barmaids like you had to manage them as tactfully as they managed the drunks. Speaking of drunks, there's a merchant you recognize slumped at the bar, face down in a pool of spilled beer. You nudge him gently. He grunts, lifts his head, and says, "I didn't steal the chickens. They followed me home." "Sure," you say, sliding him some bread. You move to the next table, 2 women arguing about whether Jeffrey the tailor is a wizard. One insists he must be because her blouse no longer fits, and he cursed the stitching. The other says it's just because she's with child. You clear your throat. They both stop. "Any drinks?" cider one mutters. Which proof please the other adds. You smile, no promises. Behind you, someone starts singing, loudly, off-key. The dulcimer player cringes. You spin to see it's Oswin once again standing on a chair with one boot off one arm around a jug of ale and the other pointing heroically at nothing. You start counting in your head, 3, 2, and there it is. The chair tips. Oswin falls, arm flailing, ale flying in a glorious arc that splashes across the nearest patron's cloak. Gasps. A pause. Then the slapped man stands. You're already moving. You'll want to think carefully, you say, stepping between them with your mop handle like a scepter. Last time someone punched Oswin, he cried, and they paid for the broken nose. The man hesitates. Oswin belches. Apology accepted, you say for him, and shove Oswin back into a bench. Problem solved. Here's your fringe fact. Some taverns had unofficial peacekeepers, often the barmaid. If a fight broke out, she could end it with a glare, a broom, or in rare cases, a bucket of chamber pot water. The theory was simple: no one wants to get tossed out by someone half their size who smells like garlic and vengeance. You pass through the room again, this time with bowls of stewed turnips and bread crusts. Someone tries to grab your arm. You spin, catch their hand, and squeeze just a little too hard. Their eyes widen. You don't break eye contact. They let go. Good. The fiddlers strike up a faster tune. Feet start tapping. Someone shouts for a dance. You roll your eyes and grab the tray of empty mugs. Your hips ache, your feet throb, and your shoulders feel like you've been wrestling pigs all day, which you kind of have metaphorically. And still you move. You're not invisible. No. But you're untouchable. In the way a candle is. Everyone sees the light. Everyone forgets the heat. Until they get too close. You refill the stew, again. You pour another 20 mugs. Again. You mop another spill, again. You smile when needed. Scowl when required. And once, just for fun, you drop a spoon down a nobleman's back when he accidentally brushed your hip. He tipped you double. Midway through the night, a man leans across the bar and says, "You ever think about doing something else?" You stare at him, slowly, like what he hesitates. Shrugs. You're clever. Could be a priestess. You blink once. And trade this glamour, he laughs. Point taken. He pays in full. Leaves early. You miss him a little. And then, just before the next wave of guests crashes in, you take 3 bites of a leftover pie while standing behind the bar. It's cold, greasy, and perfect. You even get 5 seconds to chew before someone yells, "More ale," you swallow. Back to work. The law doesn't come in loud. It slips in, quiet as cold water. You don't notice him at first. Too many mugs to refill, too many elbows to dodge, too many jokes to pretend are funny. But then the cook's wife nudges you with her elbow and nods toward the doorway. There he is, standing just inside the tavern's threshold like a rain cloud with boots. You recognize him by the shoes. Always the shoes. No one else wears boots that clean in this town. Shined, polished heel tight to the ankle. Designed to move through muck without touching it. That and the heavy wool cloak fastened with a pewter badge stamped with the symbol of the reeve, your town's version of a sheriff. He scans the room slowly. Not hungry. Not thirsty. Not here for music or meat pies. He's here for you. You put down the pitcher, smooth your apron, and head to the bar. Keep moving. Keep serving. Pretend you didn't notice him. He waits. Eventually, he sidles up to the counter. He doesn't sit, just leans slow and patient. "Evening," he says. You glance up. "Drink, maybe." "After business." There it is. You exhale quietly through your nose. "Someone reported you sold ale without license," he says, low enough that the fiddler's tune covers most of it. You raise an eyebrow. If I had a license, you'd be out of a job. He doesn't laugh, but his mouth twitches, slightly. For your historical fact, in medieval England and across much of Europe, ale selling required a license in many towns. Laws changed from parish to parish, but generally speaking, women, especially alewives, could be accused of selling ale against the assize that is at the wrong strength or wrong price. The penalty: fines, stocks, public shaming, or worse if the town priest got involved. The lawman leans in a touch closer. Someone says your ale's too strong. Someone else says it's too weak. Sounds like it's just right, you say, topping off a nearby mug without looking. He watches you. You watering it down. If I were you, murmur, I wouldn't be wearing these shoes. He glances down. Mud caked to your ankles. Tattered hem. Splashes of stew and soot. Nothing elegant. Nothing luxurious. Definitely not the attire of someone with profit to spare. He says nothing. But here's the thing, you're technically not allowed to own anything. Not as a barmaid. Not as a woman of your standing. No property. No income without permission. The tavern belongs to the innkeeper. The brewing pot technically does too. And your own bed borrowed, which makes the coin you pocket flexible. He finally speaks again. You've been reported 3 times this year. I'm popular. This time, there's talk of witchery. You stare at him. I sell beer and pies. You also have herbs hidden in the larder. A neighbor saw. You fight the urge to roll your eyes. I also have rats. Should I be charged with familiars? He doesn't blink. Historians still argue whether accusations against alewives were rooted in actual law enforcement or something more fragile. Jealousy, suspicion, control. A woman with income and no husband, witch. A woman with opinions and coin, double witch. Add a few herbs and a bad haircut, burn the whole house down. You feel the heat of his eyes. Not cruel, just cautious. You can tell he's not here to arrest you. Not yet. But he wants something. Fine, you say. You reach under the bar. Not for a weapon. Just a small pouch of coin. Not silver, just pennies. Enough to say, let's not do this. You slide it across the bar, quiet as breath. He places his hand over it, leaves it there for a moment, then nods once and pockets it. Your ale, he says aloud. Now raising his voice a little for the nearby guests to hear seems acceptable. He turns on his heel and walks back out the way he came. No drama, no scandal, just gone. A moment later, Bram shouts, "Was that the tax man?" No, you shout back. "That was my fiancé." He forgot his purse. Roars of laughter. The fiddlers kick into a new tune. You let out the breath you didn't know you were holding. Then the girl from the village next over sidles up to the bar. The one with the neat hair and the worried eyes. She leans in. Is it true they can arrest you for smiling too much? You blink. What my aunt says, that's what they accused her of. Too many smiles. Said it was suspicious. You lean in closer. Did your aunt smile when she said that? She nods solemnly. You sigh. Then yes, she's probably guilty. She giggles, then takes her mug of cider and runs back to her table. You reach for a clean rag. Just kidding. They're all dirty, and start wiping down the bar. And there it is again. The question that never really leaves. How long can you keep doing this? How long before someone comes in, not for ale, not for pies, but for you, because there's only so much room in this world for a woman who knows where the money is. Only so many tavern girls who can count faster than the tax clerk and tell a counterfeit groat by weight alone. Only so much tolerance for sharp smiles and sharp tongues. You reach beneath the counter and feel the cool edge of the ledger's wax. You run your finger over it like a talisman. Then to no one in particular, you say, "Still here." Someone throws a chicken bone into the fire. It hisses. You keep wiping. You hear them before you see them. The clatter of hooves outside is sharper than usual, heavier somehow, the kind that doesn't belong to passing farmers or petty merchants. The dog under the hearth lifts its head, ears twitching. Even the scullery boy freezes half a carrot hanging from his mouth. Then the door creaks open, slow, intentional, like it's being performed. And in they walk, cloaked, hooded, boots too clean, cloaks too long. The unmistakable posture of people who've never had to mop anything in their lives. Nobles. Not the scruffy, pretend noble merchants who tip in buttons and flirt with insults. These ones are the real deal. Layers of wool and velvet. Gloves that have never known dirt. Swords for decoration, but also maybe not. They don't ask for a table. They just sit. One at the corner. Two along the bench. A fourth, taller than the rest, plants himself right in the middle of the room, pulls back his hood and stares at you. You stare right back. Because this changes things. Here's your historical fact for the night, though. Nobles typically dined in private halls or at manors with personal cooks. It wasn't uncommon, especially during travel, for the wealthy entitled to slum it for an evening. And when they did, taverns like yours had to walk the line, serve quickly, smile politely, and above all, do not presume to know them. Wine, one of them says. You raise an eyebrow. We have vinegar, he scowls. You call that vinegar, you nod. When I'm feeling generous. Polite laughter from the rest of his group. The scowling one doesn't appreciate it. You serve him the best ale instead, last week's batch, still sharp, still strong. He sniffs it, sneers, but drinks. Of course he drinks. They always do. The nobles lean in together, talking in low tones. Their rings glint in the candlelight. You don't need to hear the words. You've seen that huddle before: merchants planning territory grabs, bailiffs trading gossip, and once an honest-to-God assassin trying to bribe someone with a piglet. You slide around them like mist. You don't ask names. You don't offer conversation. Your background, and that's how you survive. One of them catches your wrist as you pass. His fingers are pale and soft, unused to work. You stiffen. "Do you have roast meat?" he asks. You smile without showing teeth. "We have meat. It's been roasted." Another laughs again, more freely this time. "Bring it, girl. And mustard if you have it." You don't. But you bring horseradish and call it good enough. The noble who grabbed your wrist lets go, but not before brushing his fingers against your palm, testing boundaries. You pretend not to notice. You also don't forget. You head to the kitchen. The cook is already muttering. Nobles, you nod. The arrogant kind. He grumbles and starts slicing the meat from a questionable roast that's been drying near the hearth. You don't ask questions. It smells passable, and you have mustard-colored horseradish. That's all that matters. You return to the table with the platter, place it carefully down. One of them, maybe the youngest, thanks you under his breath. It throws you for a second. Most of them don't. The fiddlers have gone silent, too afraid to play something that might be seen as uncouth. You wave at them discreetly. Play. Lighten the room. Music returns quietly at first. A slow song, courtly, cautious. You mouth louder. They obey. Soon the room resumes its rhythm. But now it's different. There's a tension now, a weight, like the tavern's holding its breath. Everyone else pretends not to stare at the nobles. Everyone fails. You pass behind the bar and finally get a moment to breathe. That's when the noble in the center calls you over. You freeze for half a second, then move. He gestures to the bench beside him. "Sit," he says with the careless authority of someone who's never been refused. You don't. I'm working. He studies you. You don't want to sit. No, you say, I want to be paid. The men laugh again, except the one who spoke. He just watches you longer than is comfortable. I like you, he says. I already have a broom, you answer. Laughter again. His face tightens, but only slightly. You drop off another round of mugs and move on. Here's your quirky tidbit for this evening. Some taverns, particularly in market towns or near castles, would occasionally attract nobility during festivals or hunting trips. Barmaids were often warned not to speak unless addressed. Still, many kept track of titles, family crests, rumors, debts. Not for gossip, but for safety. Knowing who someone was could mean the difference between coin and ruin. Historians still argue whether interactions like these were genuinely social or just nobles slumming it for sport. Back at their table, the nobles are laughing harder now, clearly tipsy. The tall one's voice rises. She told me I wasn't her type, he says loudly. So I told her I wasn't her servant either. More laughter. Someone slams a hand on the table and a mug spills. You catch it mid-fall and replace it before they even notice. You're part of the furniture now. Silent, efficient, forgettable. That's what you want. Until they start singing. It's not a peasant song. Not even a tavern tune. It's something from court, a drinking chant with rhymed Latin and clapped rhythm, almost mocking in its refinement. You stand behind the bar and polish a mug just to look busy. But you know the song. You heard it once before, years ago, when you were younger and the Reeves' son got married. It ended in vomiting and a broken lute. Tonight, it ends quieter. The nobles drain their cups, throw down some coin, mostly real, and rise to leave. The tall one lingers. Looks at you again. You ever want to work in a better place? He says, come find me. You don't answer. They leave. The room exhales. Bram shouts. Well, that was tense. You finally laugh. Just a little. Someone near the fire whispers. They say nobles can get away with murder. You reply without thinking, only the good ones. Then you sweep up the crumbs, pocket the real coins, and hide the counterfeit ones under the bar for later trading. The night's not over. But the worst of it has walked out the door for now. The nobles leave a vacuum behind. Not just in the air, though. Blessedly, it now smells a little less like entitlement and lavender, but in the whole rhythm of the tavern. Everything is just a bit quieter. Even the lute player, who's usually 3 drinks away from reenacting a bear fight, seems oddly subdued. You take the opportunity to clear their table. No tips, of course. Nobles don't tip. They gift occasionally, and only when they want you to owe them something. What they left behind instead are bones, greasy smears of horseradish, and a perfectly good pewter spoon you're definitely keeping. The cook calls out that the stew pot's low. You nod and head toward the back storeroom. Outside, you hear the town bell. Faint but clear 1 chime. Late evening. The hour when the truly interesting people start slinking in. First, it's a hooded figure with a satchel and a faint limp. Then 2 men whose eyes don't match their smiles. Then the friar. Another one. You squint. No, not the same as earlier. This one's younger, cleaner, and already halfway to drunk. You sigh. You just mopped that section of floor. Then the door creaks open again. The smell hits first sour wool, wet leather, something faintly fungal. Then the sounds, gravel crunching boots, someone whistling off-key, and a dog barking somewhere behind them. You brace yourself. 3 men enter. Not nobles, not locals either, and definitely not the kind who order pay drink and leave. These are outlaws. You've seen them before. Not these exact 3 maybe, but their type. Travelers with too much coin and no conscience. Swords too sharp for peace. eyes that scan the room not for friends, but for weaknesses. The tallest one, big chin, smaller brain, approaches the bar and leans in too close. You still serving? You nod. If you're still paying. He laughs like you've told a joke. His breath smells like rotten apples and beef jerky. 3 ales and meat, hot, you pour. As you slide the mugs forward, your hand brushes his, just for a moment. But it's enough. You see the twitch of a smirk, the look of someone deciding what to take next. You turn away. He calls after you. What's your name? You don't answer. The scullery girl watching from the doorway mouths, "You all right?" You nod. Not really, but also yes. You pass by the table where the new friar is seated. He's already surrounded by half-eaten bread, 2 empty mugs, and what might be a philosophical crisis. Wine, he announces suddenly to no one in particular. Red, if possible. You bring him watered cider. He drinks it with the same enthusiasm anyway. Here's your historical fact of the night: taverns didn't exist in isolation. They were hubs not just for food and drink, but for everything else life threw at people: travel, religion, theft, illness, birth, gossip, and fugitives. Churchmen stopped here. So did mercenaries, outlaws, pilgrims, midwives, thieves. Sometimes all in the same night. And often they all wanted something from you. At the outlaw table, the tall one's eating like he's in a contest with himself. The other 2 are watching the room. One of them scratches at his sleeve nervously. His hand keeps drifting toward the knife at his belt. You clock it. You always do. They're not talking much. That's never a good sign. One of them stands. Not the tall one, the twitchy one. He strolls toward the hearth and crouches next to the dog there. Pats it like they're old friends. Then he looks up at you and says loudly, "You ever get robbed, girl?" The room stills. Slightly, just slightly. You wipe your hands on your apron and tilt your head. Only of patience. The tall one laughs again. The third one doesn't laugh at all. You're aware of the distance between you and the nearest broom handle. Also the fire poker. Also the heavy crock of pickled eggs behind the bar. All serviceable weapons in the right mood. You approach their table slowly. You carry a tray with more ale, some crusty bread, and a knife that's seen better days. You place it down carefully. The tall one gives you another of those smiles. You're quick. Quicker when I'm scared. He raises an eyebrow. You don't flinch. Not yet. He leans back satisfied. Probably thinks he won. Here's your fringe tidbit. Some taverns kept a small weapon hidden behind the bar. A club, a knife, even just a length of chain. In towns without guards, you were your own defense. And it wasn't unheard of for a barmaid to go full bear mother on a troublesome guest, especially if he started threatening regulars. One local legend says a woman once drove a man out by flinging hot porridge into his face and chasing him with a ladle. You believe it. You felt that ladle rage before. Later, the twitchy one tries to sneak a coin pouch from a passed-out merchant. You see it. Everyone sees it. You say nothing until he stands. Put it back. He freezes. So does the room. You don't raise your voice, you don't blink. I said you repeat, put it back. The tall one chuckles. She's serious. The twitchy one mumbles something and drops the pouch. It lands with a clink. You walk over and collect it. Return it to the merchant's coat pocket. Then you return to the outlaw's table and pour the rest of their ale onto it. On the house, you say sweetly. The tall one stands up. He's taller than you remember. Careful, girl. Always, you reply, already turning. Behind you, the scullery boy has picked up the fire poker. Good lad. The outlaws sit back down. And eventually, they leave. You follow them with your eyes all the way to the door. One of them glances back. You hold his gaze, no smile, no flinch. Just one barmaid, 3 mugs down with nothing left to lose tonight. And then they're gone. The friar burps. The fiddler starts up again. The rhythm of the room returns like a heartbeat skipping back into place. You mop the floor again, and you still don't get to eat dinner. You've accepted it, the tavern smells bad. Not just bad, permanent. Like someone tried to pickle a sheep in old ale, then forgot it for a decade. You've scrubbed, mopped, tossed herbs into the hearth, and even once hung lavender bundles under the benches. None of it helped. Tonight, the scent is especially vicious. A blend of boiled cabbage, wet wool, fried grease, and something faintly reminiscent of despair. It clings to the walls, your clothes, your hair. At this point, you are the tavern. You pass Bram, who's gnawing on a bone that may or may not have come from the roast chicken you served earlier. Smells like home, he says, grinning. If home is a midden heap, sure, you mutter. He raises his mug to toast your sarcasm and then promptly sneezes into his elbow. You sigh. Another one catching the town cough. Lovely. You return to the kitchen for more stew, trying not to gag as you pass through the thickest pockets of smell near the hearth. You swear you hear something squish underfoot, but you don't look down. That way lies madness. Here's your historical fact of the evening: medieval taverns didn't smell good. Sanitation wasn't a concept so much as a cruel joke. Floors were rarely washed, just swept. Food scraps, beer spills, rat droppings, and all manner of bodily expulsions soaked into the wood. Candles made from animal tallow didn't help. They smoked, dripped, and filled the air with a rich bouquet of beef fat and smoke. In short, your nose gave up hope long ago. You stir the stew pot and accidentally stir up a new layer of scent onion garlic and what might be last week's eel. You serve it anyway. The bar's full and people are asking for second helpings. No one questions what's in it. The more flavor, the less anyone wonders. One of the lute players calls over, "You got any of that nice-smelling stuff for sale?" "What's it called?" "The flower water." You blink. "Perfume." He nods. "My wife says I reek of ale and other women." "She's not wrong," you mutter. You reach under the bar and toss him a tiny vial of rose water. Someone gave it to you months ago as payment for hiding a basket of smuggled lace. You never used it. What's the point? He catches it, sniffs it, and winces. "Is it supposed to burn my nose?" "Yes. And it still won't fix what's going on in this room." Here's a quirky tidbit. People in the Middle Ages used all kinds of bizarre things to combat body odor: citrus peels stuffed into their sleeves, sachets of crushed herbs, and even crocodile dung. That last one was used by the Egyptians, but some medieval herbal guides kept it around for, shall we say, adventurous remedies. Historians still argue whether those were practical solutions, or just elaborate pranks that got out of hand. You once tried carrying rosemary in your apron. It worked for half a day before the cook thought it was garnish and tossed it into a pie. At a nearby table, a trader from the coast peels off his boots. A wave of scent rolls across the room like the tide. You cough. A few people gag. One man actually claps. You lean over and hiss, "Put them back on or drink outside." He pouts but obeys. No one wants to lose their seat. You grab the vinegar jug and begin your nightly ritual of sloshing it across the floor in strategic spots. It doesn't clean, but it does change the smell from death to pickles. You'll take it. As you work, someone taps your shoulder. It's the miller's daughter, maybe 14, eyes wide and nose wrinkled. "Do you smell that?" she whispers. You stare at her for a long moment. "Yes," you say. "All of it." "No, not." Not the usual, she insists. Something worse. You frown. You do smell something odd, faintly smoky, not like the hearth. More metallic, more wrong. You turn slowly and follow the scent to the back hallway, the one with the leaky window and the stairwell up to the rooms. You sniff. The smell's stronger here. You nudge open the window. Nothing. Just night air and soot. You glance up the stairs. The smell's coming from above. You climb quietly, your knees creaking in protest. Each step makes the scent sharper. You reach the top landing and knock on the nearest door. Nothing. You push it open slowly. Inside is a cot, a tattered blanket, and a half-burnt candle stuck into a saucer. And next to it, someone's old boots, sitting too close to the candle. One is smoking gently. You snort. Of course. You grab the boot, stomp it out, and toss it into the hearth in the hallway. Someone yells down the stairs. "Is something on fire?" "Yes," you shout. Someone's fashion sense. Back downstairs, the miller's daughter is still watching you. "Boot fire," you explain. She nods solemnly. You get her a cup of weak cider and send her back to her family. The smell doesn't vanish, of course. It just mixes into the already chaotic perfume of the room. A guest near the bar takes a deep breath and says, "You know, it reminds me of home." You squint. "Where do you live?" "Next to the tanner's shed." Makes sense. You steal a few moments by the window, breathing through your sleeve. The night outside is cool, damp, filled with the sounds of distant dogs and someone throwing up in the alley. Peaceful. You glance down at your arms. Your skin's sticky from sweat, and your clothes are clinging in all the wrong places. You'll need to wash again tomorrow. Maybe with the harsh lye soap that leaves your hands raw. Maybe with just cold water from the rain barrel. You won't get the smell out. Not really. But at least you'll feel slightly less like a walking soup stock. You mop the last of the vinegar across the floor. It shines in the candlelight like something sacred. A guest raises his mug. "To the brown hen, worst air in the county, but the best stew." The room laughs. You bow theatrically. "We try." Another guest adds, "I lost my sense of smell here. Haven't sneezed in months." "Put that on the sign," someone else calls. You raise your voice just slightly. "The brown hen so bad, it's good." And for a moment, the scent fades, not because it's gone, but because you're laughing. Everyone is. Even the dog. Even you. It starts with a game of dice. Of course it does. It always does. The two men are hunched over a barrel near the hearth, one with a beard that could catch soup, the other with fingers too nimble to be honest. They roll with the solemnity of monks. One grunts, the other swears. The dice clatter. Coins change hands, then change back, then vanish altogether. You spot it from across the room because you've seen this before. You know that sleight of hand shuffle, the one where a coin drops beneath the knee and gets palmed like a boiled egg at Easter. You call out, "Keep it friendly, boys." They both glance at you, wide-eyed and full of innocence. Terrible actors. You give them the look, the one you use when soup's boiling, stew's burning, and someone's trying to cheat on your watch. They resume the game, slightly more honest. For now. At the next table over, a knight real or just very committed to cosplay leans back on two legs of his stool. He's had at least 6 pints and is now explaining at great length how he once fought a goose the size of a wolf. The barmaid from across town snorts into her cider. Was it armored too? The knight scowls. Had talons. You raise a brow. You mean claws? No, he says very seriously. Talons. Like vengeance. You're not sure if it's the ale or the brain rot, but you bring him another pint anyway. It's better than a fight. Speaking of fights, You notice the tension at the dice barrel again. Beardy looks red-faced. Nimble Fingers is grinning too much. There's a clink of coin. A pause. Beardy slams a hand down. You cheated. Nimble shrugs. Luck favors the bold. And just like that, a mug flies. It doesn't hit anyone, thankfully. It just sails across the tavern and lands in the firewood pile. The room goes still. Everyone looks at you, because this, dear listener, is your moment. You grab the broom. Not to clean, to separate the fools. You march over and slam the handle between the two men. Take it outside, you say. Calm. Clear. No room for argument. Beardy glares. Nimble stares. The broom doesn't blink. They grumble, but they stand. One kicks over the barrel. Dice scatter. Coins roll. The knight applauds. You scoop up the dice and pocket them. House confiscates the equipment, you say. Here's your historical fact of the evening. Dice games were wildly popular in medieval Europe. So popular, in fact, that multiple kings tried banning them, especially among soldiers, apprentices, and clergy. They failed, of course. Taverns like yours were ground zero for the chaos. Gambling could be legal depending on local laws, but cheating was punishable, sometimes by public shaming or loss of fingers. Depends on the mood. As for quirky tidbits, some players wore special charms or lucky clothing pieces of dried rabbit foot rings carved with saints, or even pouches of old toenails. Yes, really. Historians still argue whether these trinkets were superstition status symbols or just strange attempts at scent-based intimidation. Back behind the bar, you find another set of dice hidden under a chipped bowl. You don't know who they belong to. Doesn't matter. They're yours now. You keep a box beneath the counter of confiscated cheating tools, loaded dice, marked cards, rigged cups. One time, even a false thumb. That one still creeps you out. You serve a round of stew to a quiet table near the door. They've been watching everything, saying nothing. Travelers, maybe, or scouts. You don't ask. They tip well and don't throw mugs. That's enough. Then you hear it. The words that always make your heart sink a little. Check the count. You glance over. It's one of the merchants, tall, pale, and twitchy. He's accusing the lute player of shortchanging him during a bet. The lute player laughs. The merchant doesn't. Someone's lying, he says. And then they look at you. Because you're the one who kept the drinks flowing. You're the one who served both of them. You're neutral, or so they think. You sigh. Again. All right, you say, walking over. Show me. The merchant dumps out his coin pouch. The lute player does the same. You sort them, counting aloud. The room watches like it's a court trial. Even the friar sits up. It's close. Very close. And then you spot it, one coin heavier than it should be. A false groat lead inside, silver outside. A cheat's trick. You hold it up. The merchant goes red. The lute player smirks. Well, you raise your voice slightly. We've got a trick coin here. Not mine, the merchant says. You hand it to him. Then you won't mind if I bite it. He hesitates. That's all the proof you need. You toss it into the fire. It hisses. The merchant sits back down. The lute player nods in smug victory. You return to the bar and pour yourself a small cup of cider. You deserve it. Here's the part you don't say aloud. You know all their games. You see every switch, every sly hand, every stolen glance. You don't always stop them, but you remember. You remember who's honest when no one's looking. You remember who lies with charm, and you remember who always pays late. That's your real ledger. Later, as the fire dims and the fiddlers pack up, someone finds the original dice beneath a bench, covered in grease, still warm, probably cursed. They roll them for fun. Double sixes. The knight gasps, The goose returns, he shouts. You throw a towel at him. Another night, another dozen lies told over ale and meat pie. And you're still standing. The sky outside has turned the color of burnt parchment, that grim shade of dusk that tells you the sun's gone, but the night hasn't quite decided what mood it's in yet. Inside, however, the tavern is fully committed to noise, to smoke, and to an atmosphere that could only be described as aggressively celebratory. The fiddlers are back at it again, this time joined by a man with a hammered dulcimer who looks like he hasn't slept in 3 days. You're not sure where he came from. You're not sure how he came from. But he's playing with all the chaotic energy of a man who thinks tempo is for cowards. The guests are louder now. Everyone is louder now. Laughter comes in waves, mugs slam harder on tables, and someone is dancing precariously atop a bench to a song that doesn't have a dance. That someone is Oswin. Again. And you're carrying 3 mugs, 2 bowls of stew, and an already regretful look. Coming through, you call ducking just in time as a leg kicks out mid-jig. Oswin misses you by inches and nearly topples a candle. You snatch it mid-fall with one hand and slide the stew onto a table with the other. The woman at that table gives you a nod of gratitude and says, "You ever think of joining the King's Guard? Only if they let me wear this apron," you say, blowing hair from your face. That gets a laugh. Here's your historical fact for the evening. In many medieval taverns, there wasn't really such a thing as a closing time. If there was ale and people were paying and no one had physically torn down the walls yet, the tavern stayed open. Some stayed lit well into the night, especially on market days or festival eves. No hours posted, just sheer greasy endurance. And tonight might as well be a festival, judging by the volume alone. You duck behind the bar just in time to avoid a flying bread roll. It hits the door with a thwop and slides slowly down to the floor. You sigh. "Third one this week," says the scullery girl from beside the fire. "New record," you reply. There's a rhythmic pounding beginning now, fists on tables, boots on floorboards. The music's quickening. It's turning into that kind of night. The kind where strangers link arms and try to sing lyrics no one remembers. The kind where someone breaks something and offers you payment in the form of a song. The kind where you lose time, and also your patience. You slide another tray of mugs toward a cluster of fishermen near the back. One's already asleep against a support beam, drooling ale down his doublet. His friend gently balances a chicken bone on his forehead. You leave them to it. But there's no real break. Not tonight. You hear shouting from the kitchen. Not the usual swearing, this has volume. You rush in to find the cook holding a carving knife like a duelist, facing off with the stable boy over what appears to be a stolen meat pie. He took it from the window, the cook snarls. It fell out, the boy protests. "Into your hands, I was under it already." You step between them and snatch the pie. It's warm, squashed slightly. You take a bite. "Overcooked," you say, through a mouthful, but edible. They both gape at you. You toss the rest to the dog. Problem solved. You're not sure when your job description included conflict resolution, but here we are. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some medieval taverns actually employed a sort of informal peacekeeper. Not a guard, but a regular patron who was paid in ale or food to keep things calm. This person often sat near the hearth or the door and used a walking stick not for support, but to nudge disagreements into submission. Historians still argue whether this role was official, or if it just happened naturally when the biggest guy drank for free. In your case, you are the peacekeeper, and your stick is the mop handle you haven't had time to use in hours. Back in the main room, Oswin has, against all odds, graduated from table dancing to full stage performance. He's taken the dulcimer and is now using it to accompany a loud rendition of The Widow's Waddle, which is definitely banned in 3 parishes. You don't stop him. It's actually the best he's sounded in months. Someone else is playing spoons. A noblewoman, probably in disguise, is clapping a long skirt pulled up to her knees, lace petticoats flailing as she stomps in rhythm. Her 2 guards are watching nervously from the doorway. You give them a slow nod. They look ashamed to enjoy it. You slip around the side to collect mugs, stepping over a passed-out carpenter and under a flagon mid-swing. This is the rush that never ends. The one that starts after sunset and doesn't stop until the fire goes out. The ale runs dry or someone dies. You've seen all 3. You dodge a flying boot. You pluck a spilled coin from a bench. You whisper to the girl near the fire. That man's been eyeing your purse, and she nods, tucks it deeper, and slides you a halfpenny in thanks. The dulcimer finally breaks mid-song. A mournful sproing echoes through the room. Oswin stares at it like it betrayed him. Then he slumps forward and lands directly in the meat pie. Applause. You step in to clean, but someone grabs your wrist. Not roughly, just firm. It's the noblewoman. You were right. She's flushed from ale and dancing hair plastered to her forehead. "Do you ever dance?" she asks. You blink. "Not for free." She laughs. "But you know how better than Oswin." She releases your hand curtsies with an exaggerated wobble and returns to her bench. You watch her whisper to one of her guards. A pouch exchanges hands. She's slipping coins into random mugs. "Why's she doing that?" the scullery girl whispers. "She's drunk and kind. Amazing." You nod. Rare combination. The night rolls on. More drink, more music. Someone sings in Latin. Someone else answers in gibberish. You serve 3 more rounds, wipe 5 more spills, and threaten to pour stew on a man's boots if he doesn't sit down now. He sits. Then finally, the music starts to slow. The fire burns low. The floor is sticky, and the benches groan with the weight of half-sleeping guests. You walk to the center of the room. Clap your hands once. Last call, a chorus of groans, a few cheers. And one man tries to order breakfast. You ignore him. You serve the final round slowly. You offer water. You collect the dice, the mugs, the cutlery, and the confessions people mutter while they think you're not listening. The rush ends not with silence, but with a gentle hum. Snores, creaking chairs. A sleepy tune hummed by the fiddler as he packs up. You lean against the bar. Breathe. Watch the fire crackle. Still standing, still working. And yes, still here. There's a lull now, that strange hush that happens when the tavern forgets it's alive, when the ale's all poured, the fire's low, and the only sound is the occasional thunk of a mug being dropped by someone whose hands no longer work. It's not peace. Not quite. Just exhaustion. You take a long breath, letting your spine uncoil for the first time in hours. You lean against the bar and look out across the battlefield. Mugs, overturned stew stains painting the benches, 2 spoons fused together by dried gravy, and Oswin snoring into what's left of the dulcimer. And in the corner, there's the noblewoman again, finally seated properly, with her head resting on her guard's shoulder. Her veil is askew, revealing a face flushed from laughter and mead. The guard doesn't move. He just sits still watching the flames, one hand on the hilt of his sword, like he's guarding something more fragile than gold. You look away. You've got work to do. You're halfway to cleaning the last table when it starts. A scream, not theatrical, not drunk. A real one, sharp, high, and close. You spin. From the kitchen, You race toward the door, already bracing for fire rats or heaven help you, the eel pot tipping over again. Instead, you find the cook and his wife yelling at each other over a broken crockery pile while the scullery girl hovers nearby, pale and trembling. "He threw it," the cook's wife is saying, pointing to the open doorway. "The lordling, the tall one with the cloak. The one who smelled like cinnamon," the scullery girl adds, voice tiny. The cook is holding his wrist, a welt already forming. The floor's wet with stew and something darker. You step over the mess and push open the door to the alley. Gone. Just a flicker of movement down the lane, long cloak, soft boots. You don't follow. No point. No one catches a noble unless they want to be caught. You turn back to the kitchen. The cook's wife is kneeling now, dabbing her husband's arm with a damp cloth and muttering all the ways she's going to poison the next roast. The scullery girl is still trembling, and you place a hand on her shoulder. "Go sit by the fire," you tell her. "But the dishes, I'll do them." She blinks at you like you've offered to fly, then nods and scurries off. You stand in the middle of the wreckage for a long moment. This is what people don't understand. It's not just the drunks, or the spills, or the rats. It's the suddenness. The way calm turns to chaos in a breath. The way power walks into your kitchen, breaks something, and walks out again untouched. You roll up your sleeves and clean up the mess. Here's your historical fact for the night: nobles who traveled had little accountability once they left their own towns. They could walk into a village, stir up trouble, insult the locals, even assault servants, and then leave before anything could be done. Local authorities might not even try to pursue justice, especially if the noble had land wealth or a powerful name. And here's your quirky tidbit. In some towns, tavern keepers developed secret hand signs or objects to warn others of bad nobles. A sprig of rosemary on the door, a candle in the wrong window, or even something as simple as flipping the tavern sign upside down. A quiet network of survival passed hand to hand, whisper to whisper. You don't have a sign, but maybe you'll start hanging onions near the fire when someone dangerous comes through. As a warning, as a ward. Back in the main room, things have shifted. Oswin's still asleep, but two more guests are arguing loudly. One's a weaver. The other might be a tanner, or just someone who smells like one. Their nose-to-nose, breath-heavy voices rising. You move fast. Again. The moment you step between them, they both point at each other. He said, "My boots are cow gut." He said, "My hands smell like frogs." I said, "Your boots were made like cow gut." You raise a hand. Gentlemen, if you'd like to measure each other's intelligence, do it with spoons, not fists. They blink. Then one of them laughs. The other sighs. You hand them each a mug of weak ale and direct them to separate benches. Conflict diffused. Barely. But now a crash from the back room. You storm in. It's the scullery girl, standing next to a pile of firewood that's collapsed onto the floor, along with half the pots and a ceramic rooster. "I tripped," she says miserably. You sigh. Was it an honest trip or a rebellion against your duties, she thinks. Somewhere in between, you help her clean it up. Again. Then you hear something strange. Not a crash, not a shout, a laugh. High-pitched, joyful. You turn to see two of the kitchen boys sword-fighting with bread loaves. One loaf splits mid-swing, spraying crumbs like battle confetti. The other boy crows in victory. You don't stop them. For a second, you let it happen. Because even chaos has moments of grace. Here's your open, scholarly debate for this evening. Some historians argue that taverns were the true heart of a town, not the church, not the market, not even the manor. A place where every class passed through, where news was traded faster than coin, and where the invisible threads of community were tied, snapped, and retied nightly. Others insist they were just distractions. Necessary, yes, but ultimately destructive to moral order. You stand in the center of yours and wonder, is this destruction? Or is it just life, loud and ugly and sticky as it may be? You return to the bar. Start stacking mugs. The fiddler is tuning his instrument again. A slow, sweet melody this time, almost a lullaby. The fire's gone low. The scullery girl is asleep on the bench, a blanket draped over her shoulders. You sit behind the bar, finally, and for a moment, just one, you let the quiet settle around you like a warm cloak. Until "Where's my bread?" you groan. Again, back to work. You find the bread, or what's left of it. 2/3 of a loaf, dented, slightly burnt, and stuffed behind a jug of turnip cider. You hold it up to the complaining patron with all the grace of a court servant presenting a jewel-encrusted goblet. He scowls at it. "This isn't what I ordered." You stare at him. "It's bread. But I asked for warm bread." You tilt your head slightly, then hold it. He takes it, grumbling. Across the room, someone sneezes so violently a spoon flies off the table. The lute player catches it mid-air and bows. A smattering of applause follows. You wonder if this counts as theater. You return to the bar where the ledger waits. Your wax stylus is nearly worn to a nub, but you make the evening's marks anyway. 7 mugs unpaid, 3 bowls of stew, gifted 1 brawl, averted 2 new dice confiscated, and 5 mystery stains. You don't question the last one. You just draw little X's and hope they don't start moving. Then you notice it again. The twitch, the glance, the slip. At a corner table, a boy not more than 13 clothes too clean to be poor but too worn to be rich is passing something under the bench. Not to someone you recognize. Not to a customer at all. To someone who hasn't ordered a thing all night. You narrow your eyes. The stranger is slim, cloaked, not armed visibly, but also not unarmed. He moves like a shadow with manners. The kind of person who appears beside your table without walking there. They're talking quietly. Too quietly. You circle around casually, pretending to wipe the wall, which does, to be fair, desperately need it. You catch fragments. Shipment next week. The other ledger's hidden. Hen coops just cover. You don't flinch. You don't interrupt. You just walk back to the bar, make one small mark in the corner of your wax tablet, a symbol that only you know means watch this one and pour another cider. Not your business. Until it is. Here's your historical fact. Medieval taverns were often more than drinking holes. They were smuggling hubs, message drops, unofficial guild halls, and sometimes hiding places for political dissidents. Because where better to trade secrets than somewhere no one listens, and your quirky tidbit for the night. Some barmaids were also informants, double agents in a world of barley and betrayal. Paid in coin favors or protection, they carried messages between rival merchants, spied for town councils, or kept tabs for criminal networks. Historians still argue whether this was widespread, or just a few very clever women rewriting their fate between mugs of ale. You'd believe either. A man near the fire beckons you over. You expect a refill. Instead, he says, "There's someone upstairs in the larder." You blink. The larder. He nods. He's asleep on the salted pork. You sigh. Again. Of course he is. You head up the narrow back stairwell, candle stub in hand. The larder's door creaks open on hinges that squeal like a bad joke. Inside, barrels salt-crusted cloth, and sure enough, a man curled on top of the pork, snoring gently. You prod him with a spoon. No response. You prod harder. He rolls over and mutters, "Tell the goose I'm not coming back to the river." You prod him again. He startles awake, eyes wild, hair sticking up like a tortured hedgehog. "You're in the meat," you say flatly. "Oh," he says, sitting up. "I thought this was my uncle's wagon. You're 3 floors too high and 2 pigs too deep." He looks around, nods slowly, then climbs down and stumbles out. You check the pork. It's warm now. Great. That'll be popular tomorrow. You return to the main room where a girl you've never seen before is feeding crumbs to a one-eyed cat that definitely does not belong here. She grins when she sees you. "I brought him in. He catches rats." "He is a rat," you say. "He's bigger than the rats." You can't argue that. The cat hisses at a random corner and curls up on the hearth. You leave him be. Back behind the bar, the stranger from earlier has vanished. So has the boy. Your wax tablet has more notches now. You add 2 more, and then it happens. The real secret deal. Not under a table, not in a dark corner, right in front of you. A merchant, squat, greasy, with a coin purse that jingles like betrayal, leans in and whispers, "How much to use your cellar tonight?" You blink. For what storage? Of he smiles, oily and yellow. Things. You stare at him. I see. He places a silver coin on the counter. You stare harder. He places another. You slide them both back. The last person who stored things here had fleas, and not the regular kind. He laughs, tries again. You say nothing, just tap the fire poker twice against the hearth. The merchant hesitates and leaves. A few patrons cheer. You give a short bow and return to your post. Because some deals you allow, and some you shut down with extreme professionalism and a well-timed glare. Another guest slides up and orders whatever won't make me see ghosts. You hand him a bowl of stew and say, "No promises." You serve 3 more mugs. You sweep the bones under the tables. You find a second cat. You ignore it. Then someone whispers your name. You turn. It's the boy. From earlier. Alone now. He places something on the bar. A ring. Small. Iron. Shaped like a serpent biting its own tail. "No charge," he says. Then he's gone. You pick up the ring. Feel its weight. You don't know what it means. Not yet. But you put it in the drawer next to the false dice and the sealed note from last spring that still hasn't opened itself like the man said it would. Tavern secrets. Barmaid keepsakes. Tomorrow maybe they'll matter. Tonight you mop the floor. Again. The rain starts like it always does suddenly. You hear at first a whispering on the thatch, a quickening patter that turns the roof into a drum. The tavern sighs in reply. The regulars glance toward the windows, which are too fogged and grimy to see through, and mutter things like, "Ah, there it is," and should have brought in the goat. You light another candle as the wind pushes against the shutters. They rattle like loose teeth. Someone mutters a prayer, and someone else mutters something about getting home before the lane turns to soup. No one leaves. Because it's not just rain. It's the kind of downpour that makes the air heavier, the walls feel closer, and the floor leak in new exciting places, which means you'll be patching again, with straw and cursing. "Where's the bucket?" you call toward the back. The scullery girl appears, bucket already in hand. You nod. She's learning. The usual leak has already begun above the hearth, dripping right into the good seat. You move the bucket under it and wait for the rhythmic plop, plop, plop to join the evening's soundscape. The dog looks at it, sighs, moves. Then someone shrieks from the floorboards. You freeze. It's a thin sound. Not human. Not rat either. You crouch near the bar, pry up a loose plank, and squint into the dark beneath the floor. 2 glowing eyes stare back. You close the plank slowly. The cat, both of them are now watching that spot. You say nothing. Later problem. Here's your historical fact. For this wet and unsettling night, most medieval taverns had thatched roofs and packed dirt floors covered in rushes or straw, which trapped moisture, mud crumbs, fleas, and occasionally live animals. Roofs leaked constantly, and repairs were often made with whatever was available: cloth scraps, leftover wax, or wishful thinking. The smell gets worse when it rains. Everything rises: old beer, wet wool, unwashed bodies, soaked straw. The warmth makes it ferment in the air. Smells like soup, someone jokes. You don't respond. You're eyeing the ceiling again. Because now there's a second leak. The mop bucket becomes dual purpose. You place a chamber pot under the first leak, a basin under the second, and consider just giving the roof to the rain gods as tribute. Then someone asks, "Is this place haunted?" You don't look up. You know who asked. The boy from earlier. The one with the serpent ring. Why, you say, still wiping the bar. He leans closer, because something just whispered to me in the stairwell. You pause. Was it Oswin? He shakes his head. Oswin's asleep and snoring. You nod. Then maybe. The boy tilts his head. Maybe you wipe another mug. This building's older than the dirt under it. Things whisper. Just don't whisper back. He stares at you for a beat too long. Then he walks away. The scullery girl sidles up to you again. It is haunted, she whispers, more thrilled than scared. Once I heard the bread shelf moan. That was the cook, you say. He slipped on butter. But I also saw haunted you interrupt by work. She pouts and retreats. Here's your quirky tidbit. While we often romanticize ghosts in crumbling castles, taverns had their fair share of spooky tales. Many old inns had legends of spectral drinkers, phantom dogs, flickering candle flames that danced to music only the dead could hear. Some even had specific ghosts blamed for broken mugs or spoiled ale. Historians still argue whether these stories were based on real folklore or just creative excuses for clumsy hands. You've used both. A sudden wind slams against the door. A few guests jump. You calmly relatch it, kicking the threshold back into place with practiced ease. Storms worse than the priest's sermons, someone mumbles. I'd rather get struck by lightning than listen to Father Wulfric again, someone else adds. You quietly pour yourself a half mug of weak cider and sip. The flicker of the hearth makes the shadows dance now. They crawl up the walls, across the beams, under the table legs. You catch yourself watching them move. For a moment, you wonder if one of them is watching you back. You shake it off. Someone's playing dice again. Someone else is carving a symbol into the table. You look closer. It's the serpent. You blink. Who drew this? No one answers. You don't press. Just wipe it with a cloth. It doesn't come off. You move on. The stable boy comes in, soaked through teeth, chattering. The thatch is giving way again, he stammers. It's coming through the wall. You hand him a spoon and a handful of straw. Patch it. And don't use the salted hay this time. He groans, but it smells nicer. It attracts goats. He trudges back into the rain. Someone near the door suddenly slams their mug down. Who keeps whistling? He growls. Everyone freezes. No one's been whistling. You glance at the hearth. The cats are gone. Just empty stones and the faint smell of ash. You clear your throat and say, all right. We've had singing ghosts, leaking roofs, haunted stew, and spooky dice. Someone laughs nervously. You grin. Next person who complains gets to sleep in the meat closet. General laughter. The tension breaks. You return to your ledger. Your hands are damp from the rain. Your sleeves are wet halfway to the elbow. The mopped floor squelches when you walk. You glance outside. No stars, no moon. just water in the air and shadows between raindrops. The innkeeper finally stumbles down the stairs, wrapped in a blanket and smelling like boiled cabbage and toothache wine. He blinks blearily. Is the rain stopping? You look at him, then at the 3 buckets, the puddles, the whispering stairwell, and the floorboard that may or may not have eyes beneath it. You nod. Sure. He yawns and heads into the back to find more stew. The scullery girl whispers, "Do you think ghosts hate the rain?" "No," you mutter. "They love it." She shudders. You mop again. The storm keeps pounding. The roof keeps weeping. And the tavern just keeps breathing. You steal your break like a thief, silent, swift, and knowing full well it won't last. You slip into the larder while the cook argues with someone about whose job it is to scrape the burnt onion pie off the oven wall. Answer yours, obviously. Inside, it's dim and cool, the stone walls sweating faintly from the rain outside. The salted pork hangs like tired guardians overhead. Jars line the shelves, pickled eggs, questionable eels, mustard so old it's starting to write its own legal charter. You settle onto a crate, hard, splintery, blessedly flat. The candle on the shelf guttered out hours ago, but your eyes adjust. You let your head tip back against the wall, your body sinking into a slow, aching stillness. 10 minutes. That's what you're stealing. 10 minutes to sit, to breathe, to not carry, lift, clean, worn, or threaten anyone. You close your eyes. The cold air is balm on your skin, sticky with sweat and ale. Somewhere far off, a lute plinks out a lullaby. Or maybe it's just the roof leaking in rhythm. Your thoughts drift. You remember other larders, other nights. Once a girl fell asleep here and didn't wake up until morning, curled up beside the smoked goose like they were best friends. Another time, 2 travelers tried to bribe their way into the pantry to steal cheese. You let them try. The cheese won. You're just starting to drift off when crash. You jolt upright. A jar rolls off the shelf, hits the ground, doesn't break, just spins lazy and deliberate, like it's trying to decide whether you're allowed to rest. You mutter something unkind at it and pick it up. Pickled carrots, the label reads. The liquid inside is cloudy. You don't put it back. You throw it behind a sack of barley where no one will ever find it again. You glance at the door. Still closed. Still time. You lean back again, just starting to soften. And then it begins. The drip. Not rain. That's outside. This is inside. You tilt your head. The sound is coming from the far end of the larder near the sealed barrels of vinegar. You creep over and crouch beside them. There it is. Drip. 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 A puddle is forming beneath the vinegar barrel. You groan. You traitor. Because of course. Of course the vinegar is leaking. You roll up your sleeve, tug the barrel aside, and find the source, a hairline crack in the base. Too small to seal tonight. You shove a bucket underneath it and call it a job half done. You wipe your hands on your apron. They now smell like a salad someone cried into. Here's your historical fact. While you sulk, medieval larders were crucial for food storage, especially in inns and taverns. They were often built below ground or into thick-walled rooms to stay cool year-round. Salted meat, smoked fish, pickled vegetables, stale bread, dried herbs, all stuffed into shelves and barrels. Everything to keep food semi-edible before fridges were even a concept. And for your fringe tidbit, some taverns, and this is whispered not written, hid people in their larders. Not always fugitives. Sometimes just extra staff who'd been borrowed without paperwork. A barmaid or a cousin who didn't officially exist, tucked away whenever a tax collector visited. Historians still argue whether this was desperate survival or a very clever business model. You sit back down. 5 minutes left. maybe 4. You drift again. This time it's dreamless. Or maybe your dream is just more tavern. That would track. Then a sharp knock at the door. Not loud, not frantic, just precise. Knock. Knock, you open it. The boy is there again, the one with the ring. His cloak is soaked, his face unreadable. "You have a place to sit?" he asks. You blink. This is it. He nods and slips past you eyes, scanning the shelves like he's memorizing them. He settles on a sack of onions and sits down. You sit beside him. You don't ask why. Not yet. He finally speaks. "I used to live in a place like this." You raise an eyebrow. A tavern, A-back room, wet walls, salted pork, no windows. You glance at the onions, comforting decor. He doesn't laugh, just looks down at the ring on his finger. You nod at it. "You gave me one of those." He nods. "What's it mean?" He shrugs. "Depends who's asking." You stare at him for a moment, then say, "I'm not asking." Yet. He stands. You'll know when you need to. Cryptic little creature. You don't stop him as he leaves. Just watch the door shut behind him, the latch clicking back into place. You sit there for another 2 minutes. Only 2. You listen to the sounds from the tavern, murmuring mug clinks the wind through the boards, and a dog snoring too close to the fire. And then you rise. Again. Because you always do. You smooth your apron, grab the mop, and march back into the noise. The floor has a new spill. Of course it does. You mop it up without thinking. Someone's asleep at the bar, nose pressed against a fork. Someone else is haggling over a boot. A third is crying because he swears his hat betrayed him. You nod at each of them in turn. Business as usual. You catch the scullery girl yawning in the doorway and toss her an apple from the basket. It hits her shoulder. She smiles anyway. The cook shouts something about the pig stew boiling over. You move. You always move. The bell tolls twice. Not the elegant, solemn kind you hear from the monastery. No, this one's your own battered iron clapper hanging crooked near the back door, rung with a boot heel. Because the pull cord broke 3 months ago, and no one's fixed it. 2 chimes means one thing: feast day. You feel it before you hear it. The town shifts in its skin. A ripple of anticipation, dread, excitement, and alcohol-soaked intention passes through the walls like a chill. You roll your neck and stretch your back. Everything pops. "Ready?" the cook asks, already covered in flour sweat and what looks suspiciously like honey. "No," you say. Then you open the shutters and let the chaos in. Feast days aren't restful. They're not quiet, they're not holy, and they definitely aren't safe. They're noisy, oversalted, undercooked, and always worse for the barmaid. You step out front. The streets are buzzing with torchlight and wet feet. Painted ribbons flap in the wind. A man dressed like a stag leaps over a barrel and nearly impales himself on a thatch rake. Children scream in delight. Someone's already got a drum going. Someone else is dancing like they're possessed by a very enthusiastic goose. And the crowd's already forming around the tavern door. You duck back inside and shout, "We're full, no one listens." They never do. Here's your historical fact for the night. Feast days, especially Saint Days harvest festivals and royal weddings, were a break from the endless grind of peasant life. The church allowed music, dancing, drinking, and even theater, which meant your tavern became ground zero for celebration. That also meant spilled drink, stolen chairs, broken crockery, and food shortages by dusk. You prep the bar as fast as possible, refill the mugs, line up the trenchers, pre-slice the bread. The stew is doubled 2 pots, now one mostly turnips, the other allegedly meat. The pies are already disappearing, and the crowd pours in. They come in waves. Families, drunks, pilgrims, market folk, shepherds with trailing sheep, even a disoriented monk still clutching his book of hours. You shove a ladle into the cook's hand and station yourself at the bar like a soldier at the gates. 3 ciders and a pie. 5 ales and a bowl for the dog is the stew vegetarian. No, you answer to all of them. You're already sweating before the bell's echo fades. The scullery girl is dragging benches into corners, trying to create walkways. A lute player has climbed onto a crate and is attempting a love ballad over the din. He's hit with a cabbage leaf, then asked for an encore. Someone offers you a chicken for a round of drinks. Alive or cooked, you ask. He blinks. It's outside. Then no. Here's your quirky tidbit. On feast days, coin wasn't always the currency. People paid with eggs, fruit, wool, even songs. In some parts of Europe, if a guest could make the barmaid laugh with a joke or a riddle, they earned a free drink. In others, patrons performed short plays or juggled poultry to avoid paying outright. Historians still argue whether this was economy or just collective madness. Tonight feels like both. A man has climbed onto the fireplace mantel and is reciting a poem about cabbage. You don't stop him. The rhythm's decent. Then someone shouts, "Dance floor," you shout back, "There is no dance floor," too late. The tables are cleared. A space opens in the middle of the tavern. Fiddles start up. Boots stomp. The floor begins to vibrate under your feet. The dog howls. The cat disappears. The scullery girl starts spinning with a sack of flour and a grin wide enough to crack her cheeks. The ale is everywhere. On the floor, in the air, soaked into your apron. You've stopped wiping your hands. There's no point. Your fingers are permanently sticky now. You're ladling stew with one hand and catching coins with the other. A noble tries to order wine again. "We don't have wine," you snap. He nods solemnly. Then, more cider. Progress. You duck to grab a stack of trenchers and narrowly avoid a flying spoon. Who threw that artistic expression fair enough? At one point, a priest comes in. Full robe, full frown, full expectation of reverence. He trips on a bench, falls flat on his back, and starts laughing like a lunatic. You offer him a mug and help him up. He toasts the ceiling. Someone yells, "May Saint Frida bless this mess." You raise your mug to that, then it gets worse. Because now the staff wants to eat. The cook is barking at the kitchen boys to grab what you can and chew fast. You've got stew dribbling down your sleeve and 2 mouthfuls of crusty bread stuffed into your cheek like a squirrel trying to chew and shout at the same time. Stew to the left, you bark. Cider to the dancing idiots. Which ones? All of them. Outside, the storms let up. More people arrive. Your stomach groans. You get 3 bites of bread, 1 sip of ale, and someone immediately shouts, "She's eating, she's mortal," you growl. Keep it to yourself. Someone throws a sausage. You catch it. Eat it. Chew with vengeance. The floor is now a swamp. You slip twice, once while catching a mug, and once while trying to outrun a roast chicken someone's released as a joke. The bird makes it out the door. You cheer for it. And then finally a pause. Not silence, just space. Breathing room. A group sings a hymn in the corner, off-key but oddly sweet. The fire crackles. Someone's asleep under a table with a hat over his face. The dog is curled next to a sack of flour, both of them snoring in harmony. The scullery girl sits beside you, her hair soaked with cider and joy. "You good?" she asks. You nod. "Still here." She smiles. "Best feast day yet." You look around. You believe her. The sun's not up, but the trouble is, you know something's off before you even open your eyes. The silence has weight, like the tavern's holding its breath. No mugs clinking, no dog scratching, no snores or late-night humming. You sit up slowly behind the bar where you must have dozed off, head against the cask apron over your face like a shroud. Your neck cracks when you move. Your back complains. Your knees vote to secede. You stand eventually, and you hear it. The knock. Not on the door, on the wall. 3 sharp raps. You freeze. Then another knock. Different wall. You squint at the shadows. You check the bolts on the door. Still locked. You check the hearth. Empty. The floor, the rafters, the mouse hole near the kitchen. All quiet. You whisper, "Please don't let this be another meat ghost." Then comes the real knock. The door this time. And this one you recognize. Because it's official. The town tax collector is standing in the rain, wearing a hat like a dead crow, and an expression like he stepped in something. Which, considering the alley, he probably did. You open the door halfway. We're closed. He pushes it wider. That's not how tax works. Of course not. He steps inside, dripping eyes scanning the carnage of the post-feast. Mugs on the floor. 2 guests still unconscious. A chicken feather in the rafters. The dog is under a table chewing on what might be a coin purse. The taxman does not smile. "I'm here to assess your tavern dues," he says. You resist the urge to say something that will get you fined for sarcasm. Instead, you wipe your hands and gesture to the bar. "Be my guest." He sits, pulls out a ledger thick enough to kill a boar with. You pull out your wax tablet. He begins. "How many barrels tapped this week?" 5. "Paid for 2. He squints. You add the others were generous donations. He grunts. "How many pies sold?" You hesitate. Do you want the truth or the version that won't get me accused of black market meat trade? He writes something anyway. "How many rooms rented?" You pause again. Define rented. He raises an eyebrow. You sigh. 6 officially. But also a storage closet, a hay cart, and the roof. Someone paid to sleep on the roof. Why they said it had fewer rats. The taxman stares at you. You stare back. He flips the page. And then the real bomb. "There's been a report," he says slowly, "that you've been hosting seditious gatherings." You blink. "I'm sorry," he repeats it. "Seditious, as in anti-authority." You gesture to the sleeping man under the table who is currently drooling on his own boot. Does he look like a revolutionary to you? You know that's not how sedition works. You sigh. Look, if people come in and sing songs about grain taxes being evil and bishops being leeches, that's not my fault. That's just good lyrics. His eyes narrow. And you add, if I happen to give free stew to someone who happens to write pamphlets about church corruption, well, I'm just generous. He writes something down. Probably suspicious, but funny. You lean on the bar. "Who reported me?" He doesn't answer. You already know. "The brewer's wife. She's been eyeing your stew customers since midsummer." Here's your historical fact. Taverns were heavily monitored by town officials in some regions, not just for taxation, but for rumors. Any place where people drank, sang, and complained loudly could easily turn political. Many revolts began with a few angry men, a tankard, and a barmaid who didn't interrupt. And your quirky tidbit. In more than one documented case, barmaids were accused of inciting sedition, just for overhearing things and not reporting them. One woman in Lincolnshire was accused because she served ale to a man who later protested a tax hike. Historians still argue whether she knew what he planned, or just had the best ale in town. Back in your tavern, the taxman finally closes his ledger. "There'll be a hearing," he says. You nod. "When soon?" That means never, or tomorrow, or during harvest, or when it's raining. He stands, hesitates, then adds, "They also said you're practicing witchcraft." You sigh deeply. "Let me guess," you say. "Because of the herbs in the kitchen, and the symbols on your ledger, their tally marks, and the ring." You glance down. The boy's iron serpent ring is still tied around your wrist with twine. "I didn't ask for it." Still wearing it. You pull it off slowly, slide it onto the bar. "There. Now you can tell them I've been cleansed." He stares. Then, to your surprise, picks it up. "Keep it," you say. He pockets it. No smile, just a nod. Then he's gone. You exhale. You don't relax, because now the whispers begin again. From under the floor, from the walls. You ignore them. The scullery girl stumbles downstairs, hair wild, eyes bleary. "Was that the sheriff? Worse, you say?" "It was paperwork," she gasps. "Did he accuse you of anything? Just treason, witchcraft, lying about stew meat?" She nods seriously. "Normal Tuesday." You look at the hearth. The dog is chewing on your boot now. You yank it back. Then something catches your eye. A small envelope, tucked under a mug. No name, no wax seal, just folded parchment. You open it. Inside a single phrase. "Still watching. Still waiting." No signature. You crumple it. Toss it in the fire. It hisses. Then the floor creaks upstairs. Not footsteps. Something else. You grab the broom. Again. You've had no food. You've had no sleep. And now you might be charged with witchcraft. But the tavern's still standing. So are you. And until the stew boils over or someone sets the thatch on fire again, you'll keep at it. Because someone has to. You wake to your name, not shouted, not whispered, just spoken like a thought that wandered out of someone else's head and accidentally bumped into yours. You blink yourself upright in the broom closet, your temporary bunk, your private retreat, your sanctuary made entirely of splinters, dust, and hanging aprons. The air smells like lavender mold and whatever the mop did last night. You have no idea how long you've been asleep. Could be 10 minutes, could be 10 hours. What you do know is that your whole body hurts. Every joint, every tendon. Even your hair feels like it's been trampled by horses. You groan, stretch, sigh, then get up. Again. You know the drill. You exit into the main room and find the tavern bathed in that gray pre-dawn half-light, the kind that doesn't so much illuminate as reveal. Crumbs on the benches, ash in the hearth. A puddle under the bar that you really hope is from the mop bucket. Someone's still snoring. Probably Oswin. Someone else is curled under a table with a cabbage for a pillow. You walk over and gently remove it. It doesn't belong to them. You start the fire. The coals sputter, then catch. The first warmth of the morning spills across the tavern floor like spilled mead, slow, sticky, reluctant. The room breathes. So do you. You sit for a moment on the bench near the window, and you look around. Still here. The thought settles in your chest like a stone in calm water. The storm has passed. The taxman's threat is still there, sure, but so are you. No gallows, no stocks, no angry priest foaming at the mouth about heretical pastries. Not yet, anyway. You rise and get to work. The mopping is rhythmic, meditative. You don't try to get it clean, you just try to make it less awful. You hum under your breath. Something old, something your mother might have hummed. Or maybe it's just a melody the tavern taught you after all these years. You scrub a stain that looks suspiciously like dried blood and smells suspiciously like beet stew. You find a spoon under a table leg, a braid of hair tied around it. You don't ask. The scullery girl arrives half-dressed, yawning like a cathedral. You toss her a roll, and she catches it with her face. Breakfast achieved. She mutters, "Did you sleep? Define sleep." Lying down, then yes. She grins and starts sweeping. It's crooked, but sincere. The sun peeks through the shutters, pale and stubborn. You hear the roosters outside, confused and late. And then customers. The first ones shuffle in, bleary-eyed, silent. Workers, laborers, no small talk, just coins and nods. You serve them bowls of whatever didn't congeal in the stew pot. It's warm. They don't complain. The ledger is back in your hand. You make the morning's marks, today's codes, today's debts. The wax is soft. You carve the truth into it anyway. Here's your final historical fact. Most barmaids didn't own the taverns they ran. They didn't own the recipes, the beds, the barrels, or even the coin they handled. But they did own the rhythm, the muscle memory, the unspoken authority, the invisible map of who owed what and who lied well. And your last quirky tidbit, in a few records, barmaids disappeared. Not vanished, but walked away. Left the tavern, the town, the kingdom. Took their ledgers, their secrets, their quiet smiles, and simply went. No one could say where. But afterward, the tavern never worked quite the same. You lean on the bar now, watching the morning unfold. You're still here. Still. You hear a creak from upstairs, a soft step, a voice faint and familiar. The boy again. He stands at the top of the stairs. "You've done well," he says. You say nothing. He drops something into the stairwell, a small coin iron with the serpent's mark. "Keep this one," he says. Then he's gone. Out the door. Into the mist. You don't follow. Just pocket the coin and return to work. Because the stew's boiling again, and someone has to stir it. Now, as the morning light stretches across the tavern floor, soft and slow as poured cream, you let the pace soften with it. The clamor of last night, the laughter, the spilled ale, the dancing on unstable benches, all fades into quiet ash and dust. You've survived another day in a place that doesn't stop, where sleep comes in snatches, and peace is a myth told between chores. Your hands ache less now, or maybe you've just grown used to the ache. The floor is cleaner than it was. The air smells faintly of broth and burnt honey, the kind of scent that oddly feels like safety. Someone hums. You don't know who. Doesn't matter. You lean on the bar, let your eyes close just for a moment. The tavern breathes with you. The walls creak softly like they're settling into place after a long, wild dream. The chairs sit patiently. The hearth glows gently. Even the mop leans with less judgment. You did it. Again. The ghosts are quiet for now. The taxman is somewhere else. The stew hasn't boiled over. The ledger waits, but not now. Now is the quiet part. The part where you sit back, listen to the rain as it softens into mist outside. Feel the weight of your limbs fade into the bench and let the tavern rock you gently into the warm, forgetful hum of rest. You are after everything still here, and for tonight, that's more than enough. End of script. Sweet dreams.